Okay.
Well,
Hello.
wait. Yes,
What?
start. It's still setting up on my computer, but I think it's gone live.
It says it's
Oh.
now streaming live on the
Go.
corner.
Yeah, go. Hello, everyone. My name is Lisa Black, and I'm one of the Rogue Women Writers. We're a group of 6 thriller writers whose backgrounds range from former intelligence officer to journalism to White House strategist. So to let you know how this is going to go, our participants in the Zoom room, you will be in the gallery during the reading. We encourage you to share and introduce yourself, share your contact information by typing it in the chat bar. For those of you joining us on Facebook Live, please comment if you have anything you'd like to tell the authors, and especially if you have a question you'd like to ask. The comments will be monitored and relayed to the authors in real time. The authors will be reading only briefly, so we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers. All of the books discussed here tonight should be available through your local bookstore. And let's all use the hashtags #RogueReads and #RogueWomenWriters as we post about our experiences with these authors and their works. As I said, my name is Lisa Black, and I am the author of 14 novels featuring forensic specialists, which also happens to be my day job. I am here in Florida working with my local police department, and I'm thrilled to be emceeing this event. And this is my first time, so bear with me. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to these amazing writers. First up, we have Joe Badal, who's tuning in from New Mexico. Joe is a former Army captain, Vietnam War vet, and financier with a specialty in real estate funding. He is the author of 16 novels and recipient of awards and recognition from multiple organizations, including the Tony Hillerman Prize, gold and silver medals from the Military Writers Society of America, and international book awards. I lost my place. His latest book is Payback, in which an investment banker, framed by his corrupt associates, at first runs and hides, but then decides to fight back. Joe's favorite snack is bruschetta with peppers and gorgonzola, and his fave wine is Argiano Brunello di Montalcino. It's $50 a bottle, so I'm going to be drinking the cheap stuff, but if you have a glass, enjoy. So Joe, tell us about what you're going to be reading tonight.
Well, as you mentioned, Lisa, and first of all, thank you to Rogue Women Writers for inviting me here tonight. This is a real privilege to be with such a distinguished group of fellow authors, as well as members of the Rogue Women Writers. I'm going to read from Payback. Payback is, as you mentioned, my 16th novel. It's a standalone. I have 3 different series going right now, and my publisher encourages me to stick a standalone book in the middle of some of my series, and as she puts it, it helps to clean my literary palate. So I would, without any further ado, I'd like to talk a little bit about Payback. Payback is the main character in Payback is a fellow by the name of Bruno Pedacci, and there's a co-protagonist by the name of Janet Jenkins. And Bruno and Janet are fairly typical of characters in all of my books, and that is they don't leap tall buildings in a single bound. They are people that readers can relate to, that they can see themselves in those same kind of situations at times. So with your permission, Lisa, I'll go ahead and set up the scene I'm about to read from.
Absolutely.
Janet Jenkins is a counselor in a battered women's shelter in Southern California. She's recently intervened on behalf of an abused woman whose husband, Rasif Essam, blames Janet for all of his problems that have come as a result of her interference, as he sees it. So when Janet returns home from work one day, she finds Essam there holding her mother captive, and the following ensues. Essam shoved Maybelle down the stairs. The old woman's frail body flew toward Janet. She stepped forward to try and catch her, but had barely covered half the distance from the front door to the bottom step when Maybelle's head struck the finial on the top of the balustrade with a thunk. Before Janet could take another step, SM ran down the stairs, knife extended, roaring with rage, hatred in the set of his mouth and in his eyes. Janet aimed her pistol, pulled the trigger, and tensed in anticipation of the weapon's noise and kick. But nothing happened as the hammer fell on an empty chamber. She pulled the trigger again, and this time the weapon boomed, the percussion of the fired bullet ricocheting off the room's hard surfaces. SM landed against her and drove her back into the front door. Her head struck the door, and the wind went out of her lungs. Her gun hand was pinned between their chests as they fell to the floor. Stunned, she tried to push him off her as he continued to vent his anger in massive maniacal shouts and curses. Then he lifted up and raised the knife. Still stunned, but aware enough to realize her predicament, she pressed the pistol against SM's chest and pulled the trigger. A loud oof escaped the man as the noise of the weapon again careened around the room. Spittle dribbled from his mouth as he made animal-like sounds. He drove the knife downward. Janet screamed in agony as the blade penetrated her left shoulder. Then SM fell away, his breathing labored, blood staining his white shirt. Janet rolled to her side and gawked at the handle of the knife in her shoulder as though its presence made no sense. She got to her knees and placed the pistol on the floor. She attempted to stand but failed and had to crawl to her mother. "Mama," she rasped, "talk to me, Mama." Janet turned her mother onto her side and gasped. The side of Maybelle's head was crushed. Blood covered the wood floor and the edge of the throw rug. "No, no, Mama," she wailed as tears clouded her vision. The inside of her skull felt as though it was filled with mush, and the sound of crashing waves on a beach roared in her ears. She had a crushing headache. Amid the noise and pain, she heard a gurgling sound and looked over her left shoulder. The movement sent searing pain through her, and she cried out. But she shunted the pain aside and leaped from her knees onto SM just as he grasped the pistol. She beat his head with her fist and then clawed at his face. But he threw a fist and connected with her side, sending a wave of pain through her ribs as she fell back onto the floor. Through a veil of tears, Janet saw the man roll and slowly bring the pistol around toward her. In that moment of clarity, when she knew she was about to die, Janet scrambled to her knees, jerked the knife from her shoulder, blood flowing down her arm, and plunged it into the man's chest. Her pain, rage, and terror-driven screams ricocheted off the walls. Then she straddled him, peered into the fading light in his eyes, raised the knife, and struck again and again and again. So you can see Janet's a tough cookie.
That sounds really good. And that was gripping.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, what's interesting is that Janet has had a tough background, and she has always stood up for herself, whereas Bruno, who I mentioned earlier, has always let other people fight his battles. And Janet is one of those people that steps up and protects Bruno when they run into one another. And over time, Bruno and Janet develop a relationship, but Bruno begins to start to fight for himself with Janet's encouragement. And so we see this development of the Bruno Pedacci character from this kind of wilting, wallflower kind of guy to somebody that finally realizes that he's going to have to stand up and fight his own battles.
Wow.
Joe,
What?
oh, I have a question. Do you bring your military background? Do you have a military background, right? So you're bringing this to play in your books?
Yeah, I not in every book, and not in some books. For instance, in this book, my financial background plays a major part in how Bruno gets revenge on his former partners. But as far as the military background, that experience comes to the fore, particularly in my Danforth Saga series, which is so far 6 books, and also in a standalone titled Ultimate Betrayal.
So Diane Bader asked, what inspired you to write this book?
Well, this book in particular, as I said, my publisher insists that I clean my literary palette and inject a standalone in between books in my series. So this is actually my 4th standalone book, The Pythagorean Solution, Shell Game, Ultimate Betrayal, and now Payback. And I think what really, besides being encouraged by the publisher, what I really wanted to write about was I wanted to take something from the capital markets crisis that occurred not just here, but worldwide between 2008 and 2009, and use that as a background for what Bruno has gone through, and then also it allows me to retaliate for him to retaliate against his former partners using financial mechanisms that I have tried to dumb down as much as I can so that everyone can understand it. So
you have a question from Pam Almond. How long has it been since you wrote Shell Game? Was this inspired by any actual events?
Yeah, Shell Game, I wrote that almost 10 years ago, and it was inspired by an actual event. A very dear friend of mine, his bank was taken over by the federal regulators, and it was unconscionable the way it was handled. And so I was motivated to write a book based on what had happened to him. And unfortunately, he didn't allow me to use his name because he was in a lawsuit with the federal government and didn't want to get into more trouble than he was already in.
And we have time for one more question. And ZJ Zuper would like to know, how long does it take you to write your novels, and what is your process like? Now, someone else has come in with a question, so answer quick. We'll move to one more.
The time it takes me to write a novel varies. Shell Game, literally, I wrote the first draft in 30 days. I was so incensed about what had happened. But typically, the process is 6 months for a first draft, another couple months for 6, 7, 8 edits, and then it's given to my publisher, and they go through and edit, and I do it, and then I make it, change what I agree with that they've brought to my attention. I write every day, usually 6 to 7 days a week, and I typically write for 3 to 4 hours a day, and then there's another hour to 2 hours every day of either research or promotional work on what I've written.
And the last question, Tom Laptop, so I don't know who that is, but to what do you attribute your ability to tell engaging stories, financing and military aside?
Well, yeah, that's Tom Avitabile, who's, by the way, an Amazon #1 best-selling author who lives in New York. And thank you for the question, Tom. Storytelling has really been a part of our family's culture, and even as I was the oldest of 5 children, and our parents would put us in their bed at night and would tell us stories, and every night one of us would be the hero or the heroine of that story, and it was kind of the never-ending story that went on and on and on. And so we grew up with storytelling, and so this is something that I always wanted to do. I got talked out of it by a father who understood banker, lawyer, doctor, engineer, professor, but didn't understand the whole business about writing. And so I'm back doing what I always wanted to do, and just thrilled about it. I'm the luckiest guy in the world, I'll tell you.
Great. We'll go back and move on, but I want to congratulate you, Pam Almond, throughout that your book, Natural Causes, was a finalist for the Independent Audio Book Awards in Mystery on Friday. Yay!
It was Joe's book, actually.
Pam's terrific. He's one of the
just
great
enjoyed reading him.
narrators in the world.
He's a great writer to work for.
Thank you, Pam.
Okay, then we should be moving on to Robin now, right?
Yep.
Are we there? Are we?
Yep.
Okay, back and go. Okay, next up, we have Robin Burcell, as a former rogue woman herself, and spent nearly 3 decades working in law enforcement as a police officer, hostage negotiator, criminal investigator, and FBI Academy-trained forensic artist. She's the author of 10 novels, as well as another 5 co-written with Clive Cussler about the Sam and Remy Fargo team of treasure hunters. In their latest, Sam and Remy return to Greece to search for the legendary hoard of King Croesus. Robin is quite the foodie, but confessed that her snack of choice is Cheez-Its, good choice, washed down with a Moscow Mule. And I'm trusting her that the copper mug is not really necessary.
I don't think so.
Okay, so Robin, tell us about Wrath of Poseidon.
Thank you very much, Lisa. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me. Wrath of Poseidon is the latest book between with Sam and Remy Fargo, the treasure hunting multimillionaire couple, created by Clive Cussler. And this is the 12th book in the series. And after we finished the last book, we were trying to come up with some ideas on what to do for the next book. And I said, what about how Sam and Remy met? Because, you know, we've known them for 11 books. I had done 4, and then the previous books, you know, they were fully fleshed couple, treasure hunting, badass, you know, just, they could do it all. So think Nick and Nora Charles, or Heart to Heart meets Raiders of the Lost Ark or something like that. So, and then you kind of get the idea of what Sam and Remy Fargo are like. So Clive liked that idea. He decided that he wanted to do how they met. And one thing that we know in all the books that they've met at the Lighthouse Cafe. And it's mentioned in every book, but it's like, but what really happened? There's got to be more than, oh, we met at a bar and we fell in love and we went out and became, you know, these, you know, badass treasure hunters with a high body count, you know, for every book. How did that happen? Sam, I get being sort of a 007 type, you know, where he's got all these skills because he has this background at DARPA and the CIA, Camp Peary, that sort of thing. But Remy, you know, she was a little more on the gray area. So I thought, well, it would be fun to find out what it was like when they met. And she was a Boston College grad. She majored in ancient trade routes with an emphasis on, or an history and emphasis in ancient trade routes. And so she's got this background that's great for treasure hunting, but she was not, you know, somebody who could just come right out and kill somebody right off the bat. And so what happened? So anyway, that's how Wrath of Poseidon came about. And so the scene that I'm going to read is part of the scene where this is the story, not only of their background, but right after they met, it was the one treasure that got away, the one treasure that they never found. And this is what happened and why they didn't find it. So it actually starts off in present day. And then somebody, you know, they go to somebody else to look for this treasure. And for Clive Cussler fans, there's a lot of Easter eggs for Mediterranean Caper, which was Clive's first novel. And so this takes place in Greece, in the Mediterranean. And in this particular scene, Remy and her friend Dimitri, they've been kidnapped, and Sam comes and he rescues them. Well, Remy and Dimitri and Sam, they want to get evidence on Adrian Carroll, who's a mob boss. And they figure if they can find this evidence, they can put him away and go on with their lives. So Sam and Remy decide that they're going to crash this black tie party. And this is before either of them were rich. So, they don't quite have the background and the money and the diamonds and whatnot, but they crash this party, they get dressed up. And Sam he breaks into Adrian Carroll's office, and Remy realizes that the guards are on their way up there and they're going to see him. And then that will be a big problem since they've got guns and Sam doesn't. So, sip of water here before I, well, not quite water, but the Moscow Mule.
I was about to ask.
Yes. All righty. Let's see here. The moment she saw Carol's attention diverted, she changed path, stepping around the rope barrier, then up the stairs. At the top level, the door was ajar. She slipped in, her footfalls cushioned by the thick oriental rug as she entered the foyer behind the guards, who had just started down the hall. "Sam," she called out in a loud voice. The two men turned and saw her. "Who are you?" one of them asked. She smiled, placing her hand on her heart. "I'm so sorry. I seem to have lost my husband. I think he's had far too much to drink." "You shouldn't be up here." "Yes, I know. I'm just not sure he knows." She gave a dramatic sigh, hoping Sam was within hearing distance and taking her warning. "He's probably sleeping it off somewhere, but I'm still worried." They exchanged glances, one of them saying something she couldn't hear. He then looked directly at Remy, saying, "Guests are not allowed." A loud noise from the hallway, something Remy could only describe as a mix between a pig's oink and a goose honk, caught them by surprise. Both men slipped their right hands beneath their jackets as they pivoted around, prepared to draw. They relaxed their stance, one of them turning to Remy, asking, "Your husband?" She peered down the hallway, seeing Sam slumped against the wall, his eyes closed, his legs sprawled out in front of him. He snored softly as one of the guards walked up to him, kicking his foot. "Get up." "I knew it," Remy said, marching over and inserting herself in front of the guards. She bent over, opening her purse with one hand, patting Sam's cheek with the other. He opened his eyes, mumbling unintelligibly. Remy tried to slip on the knife, but she couldn't when the guard moved beside her. Instead, she took Sam's hand, helping him to his feet. "I thought we agreed you weren't going to drink anymore tonight." He gave a lopsided smile as he staggered alongside her toward the door. "I only don't remember. Let's get you back to the hotel. You can sleep it off there." Unfortunately, as they neared the door, the nonplussed guards regained their senses and started to follow. "Wait!" Sam put his hand on his stomach, leaning forward. I don't feel so good." "Don't get sick in here," Remy said, grateful to see his theatrics had the desired effect. The guards had stopped in their tracks. She led Sam out, then closed the door behind them. "That was close," Sam said as they hurried toward the stairs. The moment they turned the corner, she saw a tall, stocky man with dark curly hair standing near the stairs. He turned around, his gaze hitting Remy. Fayez, one of the kidnappers, she realized. He immediately dismissed her as any sort of threat. Instead, he reached for his gun, his attention on Sam. Remy, still holding the knife, opened the blade and threw it. It hit the wall behind Fayez, clattering onto the tiles at his feet. He looked down, surprised, then at her. In the second of distraction, Sam stepped forward, blasted his fist against Fayez's face. His head bounced back against the wall and he slumped to the ground. Sam grabbed Remy's hand. "We've got to work on your knife skills," he said, leading her down the stairs. "Which way?" "The elevator down to the boat dock. Oh, mind you, I forgot to mention, this is a high cliffside house. That's going to come into play." Okay. So the elevator down to the boat dock. Sam took out his phone, sending a text to Nikos as they walked. They were halfway across the patio when the elevator door opened and two men stepped off. "Slight problem," Remy said, recognizing one of them. "That's Ilya, one of the kidnappers." "Roulette table," Sam said. "Get lost in the crowd." Too late. Ilyasar then motioned for a couple of his men to move toward them. To make matters worse, the two guards who'd nearly caught Sam in Adrian's office came down the stairs, found Adrian on the other side of the gaming tables, then pointed in their direction. Remy moved closer to Sam. What now? Stay calm, he said. There's a lot of witnesses. I doubt Carol will do anything stupid. Unfortunately, the partygoers were more interested in their gambling than anything that was happening on the periphery. No one seemed to notice when Carol's men started moving in on Sam and Remy, effectively cutting off their escape by backing them into the corner of the patio near the table where Adrian had made his announcement earlier that night. Carol approached, eyeing Remy, then focusing on Sam. My men tell me you were found in my private quarters. What were you doing up there? Made a wrong turn, Sam said. I was looking for the men's room. Take them down to the dock. You know what to do. Remy, worried that once they were out of sight of the guests, they'd have little chance of escape, glanced behind her, saw the microphone on the table. She grabbed it, turned it on, and in Greek said, Thank you so much, Adrian Carroll. Is everyone having a good time? There was a pause. The guards hesitated, realizing that their group was now the center of attention. We're so glad to hear it, Remy continued as she and Sam edged their way around the table. Please, everyone, take a moment and personally thank Mr. Carroll for the wonderful work he's doing on behalf of the children. And Adrian, if you can give us a few words on what else you have planned? More applause as she held out the microphone. The ensemble stopped playing. Without missing a beat, Adrian took the microphone and waved to the crowd. The moment he did, Sam clasped Remy's hand, whispering, This way. With the guests watching and the guards momentarily at a standstill with all the undue interest focused in their direction, Sam pressed Remy's elbow, leading her across the patio, hoping to take the stairs all the way down to the dock. Unfortunately, when they reached the lower level, two guards appeared on the stairs below, blocking their exit. To the right, Sam said. Remy kicked off her shoes and hiked up her dress as they raced past a row of lounge chairs lined up along the patio to a small retainer wall built along the cliffside. Sam hopped up, then helped her to the overhang on the other side. He looked down at the water below, then at her. You ever see Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid? She peered over the edge at the water below. You couldn't have picked a different movie, one with a less ambiguous ending? I thought it worked, he said, glancing back at the guards. We don't even know if they lived after they jumped. We don't know they died either. There are rocks down there. Try to miss them. She took a step back. I don't think I can do this. Do you trust me? She hesitated and grasped his outstretched hand. Yes. A gunshot rang out as they leaped. That's it.
Wow.
Cliffhanger. That's an ultimate cliffhanger. They were on a cliff, so.
Totally cool.
There is a question from Bonnie Huber. How did your writing partnership with Clive begin?
Well, I've heard that Clive was looking for a new co-writer. He had been through 3 previous co-writers, and he was searching for somebody specifically who could write strong women and strong men. They wanted Remy to be more relatable and yet still have Sam being, the hero. They also wanted Remy to not be so cardboard, maybe. And that wasn't the words they used, but I guess that's the best way I can kind of describe it. So they wanted some depth with her. And so they went to Barbara Peters over at Poison Pen Press and asked her suggestion for several authors who might fit the bill. And she gave them some of my books from the Sidney Fitzpatrick Forensic Artist series. And I think it was specifically The Bone Chamber and The Kill Order that Clive read and decided that my background and the way I write would fit well with Sam and Remy. So that's it in a nutshell. That's what I heard. So.
That's great. Erin Rose on Facebook wrote, amazing writer and mentor, just so you know that she's watching.
Thank you,
Erin. Let's see, anybody else have questions?
I do. this book is set in Greece. Did you get to spend time there as in the name of research?
In the name of research. As a matter of fact, I did. And it's kind of a fun story. So we knew we were going to write about Sam and Remy and how they met, but we didn't really have anything more beyond that, just that we know they met at the Lighthouse Cafe because that's what all the books say. And that's all we really knew. And so one of Clive's fans, her name is Danae Buckingham, she contacted me on Facebook and said, you know, you should set a story here in Greece. She said, specifically here where I live. She lived on the island of Forney, where most of this book takes place. And so I said, she said, you can come stay with me. And I said, oh, don't joke about something like that. I said, I might take you up on the offer. And she said, well, I'm not joking. And I said, okay. And so I called Clive and said, so what do you think about setting, you know, this story in the Mediterranean and Greece, specifically Forney? And the interesting thing about Forney, which is this, I always say this word wrong, archipelago, is that right? Of islands, a chain of little islands and islets and whatnot. Anyways, there's something like 50 shipwrecks just, you know, dotting the main island of Forney and all the surrounding waters there. And pirates used to actually hide out on this island. And Danae's boyfriend, Manos, is actually related to a pirate. And so it was just so meant to be. And Clive loved the idea of setting the book there. And so I took my my middle daughter and we spent a couple weeks on Forney and the surrounding islands and did the research. It was great fun, and there's a lot of great background. It's funny because what happened in my head is, okay, I have this idea of where the treasure is going to be buried, and it's this little island that's got a cave that, you know, comes in from the top, but you can also access it, you know, from the water level. And, you know, and I was describing it and the people, Manos and Danae and one of their friends was there, and they all looked at each other and said, oh my gosh, that sounds like this island, which I'm not going to say because then it'll kind of give it away for the book. But it was just, I'm looking at this island, they're pointing to it. You can see it from Forney. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's exactly what I was thinking. And so there was just so many things that fell into place. It was wonderful. Very, a great bit of serendipity.
So I have one question. You have a daughter and then you have a set of twins. So
Yes.
Which one's the middle daughter?
The oldest twin.
Thank you.
But see, yeah, I guess that would make her the middle. Right. Okay. So the single one was first. I had to think about that. Wait, you know.
Well, I think we'll have time for more questions maybe at the end, but I think we should keep going. So Lisa,
Okay.
take it.
Okay, so up next is John Gilstrap. And John started out to be a journalist, but wound up becoming a volunteer fireman and then an expert in explosive safety and hazardous waste with his own consulting firm. After he sold movie rights to both his first and second novels, and I'm not going to speak to him anymore, he moved to writing full-time but got restless. He then became director of safety for a DC trade association, became acquainted with Delta Force special operatives, and the idea for his character, Jonathan Grave, was born. The 11th Grave novel, Total Mayhem, finds the team searching for former special forces soldiers turned and working for ISIS, but the mission, of course, turns into something much more complicated. So John provided us the recipe for a stuffed baguette, which I love, and the, of course, perfect gin martini. So John, tell us about Total Mayhem.
Well, actually, I would love to tell you about Total Mayhem, but I'd prefer to tell you about Hellfire, which is the book that comes out in June.
Oh, sorry.
Right?
Okay, you need to work
okay
on your website because it doesn't
I
make
know,
that.
I know. You know, Jonathan Grave is I think he's an interesting character. He is born of the research that I did for a nonfiction book I did back in 2006 called 6 Minutes to Freedom, which at the time was the only book that Delta Force, this first Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta, had ever cooperated in. And to this day, Delta Force does not officially exist. It's a long story. But what I found when I was doing this research in the nonfiction book is that the Delta operators are not the beasts that they're portrayed to be in the media. Obviously, they're capable of unspeakable violence, but they're also really good guys. They're gentlemen and gentlemen, and I found them delightful to be around. Patriots all, and dedicated. First and foremost, when they go out on a mission, they're going to achieve the mission. That's if they're going to do a hostage rescue, the hostage is coming home. He might be dead, but the hostage is coming home. And there's a kind of a different model in the way we do hostage rescue overseas versus here locally. So I got this idea of having a former Delta operator who left the Army early for reasons that I know, but I've never found a reason to put it in a book. And over the years, he has assembled this great team of very loyal, very dedicated folks who work with him. And one of them is a fellow named Dom D'Angelo. Dom D'Angelo is a parish priest. They knew each other. They were college roommates from freshman year all the way through at William and Mary, where curiously I went to. And Father Dom is sort of, well, he is Jonathan's confessor, and he understands that Jonathan, in order to do what he does, it's all extra legal. He does not get warrant. And what he does because it needs to be done. He's bringing justice to bad guys. And Dom kind of helps him deal with the fallout from that. Well, Dom also, St. Catherine's Catholic Church, or St. Kate's, is right next to the converted firehouse where Jonathan lives in a fictional town called Fisherman's Cove. And we're going to pick this up after Jonathan has received a phone call at 3 a.m. from Father Dom telling him, "Open your door, we've got to talk, it's cold out here." Out of habit and an abundance of caution, Jonathan opened the drawer to the table adjacent to the door to reveal the chambered Glock 19 pistol that always resided there. Had he not known that the visitor was a friend, the Glock would have been in his hand, shielded by his thigh. Jonathan opened the door to reveal Father Dom standing a few feet back, his hands shoved into the pockets of a beige canvas ranch jacket and his expression dour. "Hey, Dom, what's up?" Jonathan stepped aside to leave room for the priest to pass. "Come on in." Dom tipped his chin as a thank you and stepped forward. "We have a serious problem," he said. He walked straight to the 3-cushion leather sofa and helped himself to a seat. "I'm missing a couple of kids." Something stirred in Jonathan's gut. Among the significant charitable causes that Jonathan supported, the one of which he was most proud and most anonymous, was his perpetual endowment of Resurrection House, a residential school for the children of incarcerated parents. Res House sat on Church Street, up the hill from St. Catherine's Catholic Church on the grounds of Jonathan's childhood mansion. He deeded the massive structure and its acres of property to the church for $1 on the condition that it be used in perpetuity as Res House. A security breach a while back had resulted in Jonathan hiring a full security team to keep the place safe. "Missing kids is a scary phrase, Dom," Jonathan said. "What do you mean?" "Father Timothy left this afternoon with that new social worker we hired at Res House, Pam Hastings, to escort 2 brothers from a foster home out past Lexington, but he hasn't come back yet. No phone call, nothing." Jonathan sat on the opposite sofa facing the priest. He had never met Pam Hastings, but he knew Father Tim to be an assistant pastor, or some such, the title didn't matter, of St. Kate's. Quiet and always friendly, he was known among the parishioners as Father Flash, having reduced the duration of his masses to just under an hour each. During Saturday confessions, his line was always the longest because he also had a reputation for easy penance. "It's a long drive. You talking about Botetourt County, that area?" "Right, a little town called Haverville, about 5 hours from here." "Well, come on, Dom, that's a 10-hour round trip. Maybe he stopped." "Maybe he did," Dom agreed, "but he would have called. Certainly by this hour, he would have called. At least one of them would have called." Jonathan wanted to find a way to talk him off the ledge, to find a way to conclude that this probably was nothing. But it truly was very late. Had he called the place they were supposed to be picked up from? Did Father Tim ever arrive? Dom was leaning far forward, his elbows forming a tripod to his knees. "I don't know. I called and no one answered. It could be because of the hour when I called. I just don't know. Jonathan understood the concern, but he didn't know why Dom was here. How can I help? Dom seemed to be stumped by the question too. I don't know, to be honest. I figured you had contacts you could reach out to. You seem to know everybody. Jonathan watched his friend's eyes. There was real fear in them. Yes, there were people who could wake up, but at this hour, that was an aggressive move to make. On the other hand, this was Dom asking. I know just the guy, Jonathan said. He pulled his phone from the pocket of his jeans, scrolled through his contact list, and pressed a button. When the line on the other end shifted to voicemail, he clicked off and punched the number again. The line rang again. I can do all this all night, Jonathan muttered. On the fourth ring of the second go-round, the line connected and the very angry voice of Fisherman's Cove police chief said, honest to God, Digger, if there's not a dead body in your foyer, missing kid, Jonathan said, getting ahead of the idle threat, on their way to Rez's house and they never showed up. Father Timothy too, along with a social worker. Dom's worried that, stop there, Doug Kramer said. Where are you? I'm at home. The Padre there with you? Yes. How long have they been missing? Jonathan relayed the question, then put the phone on speaker. I can't give you a hard number on the time, Dom said. Tim and Pam left this afternoon. No, yesterday afternoon, I guess, to go out to Haverville and come back with the two kids, two brothers, Ryder and Jeffrey Kendall. I haven't heard anything from any of them since. Where the hell is Haverville? Botetourt County, Jonathan said. Okay, and where the hell is Botetourt County? Way west, Dom said. We turned off your cell phones, didn't we? Way west, Dom said, closer to Tennessee than here, but Father Tim would have called me if there was a delay. Murphy rules the universe, Kramer said. If they broke down, it would only happen where there's no cell service. The boys are 11 and 13, Dom said. Their mom was just arrested. Their dad is dead. Silence on the other end. Come on, Doug, Jonathan coaxed. 11 and 13. Yeah, it could be nothing, but give me 30 minutes, Kramer said. I'll get my head straight and pull on some clothes and then head over to your place. And you better have coffee brewing. That's
Cool.
it.
That is totally cool. Well, I have a question if we don't have anyone else that's up.
We
But
did
it's
have
actually-
one.
Okay, let's
We
go.
do have one from Bonnie Huber. Love the idea of the Jonathan Grave challenge coin and looking forward to getting mine with my pre-order of Hellfire. How
Yes.
did you come up with the idea for these coins? And does everyone who pre-orders get a coin?
Okay, if you pre-order through Fountain Bookstore in Richmond, they have a, I think it's fountainbooks.com. If you look up, if you Google Fountain Bookstore, you'll find it. And up to, through Friday, this coming Friday, if you order a book, you also get you get it signed. It'll come with a challenge coin. A challenge coin is a thing that's very important. I came up through the Fire and Rescue Service, and I've dealt with a lot of military folks and police and what have you. And a challenge coin is a service-oriented coin. It's a unit coin, and they call it a challenge coin because if you're at a bar and you challenge somebody for their coin and they can't produce it, they have to buy the bar a drink.
Right.
If, however, they can produce it and you've challenged them, you have to buy the bar a drink. So the idea of having a commemorative challenge coin just seemed like the right thing to do. I have one. I've had one for years. It's for Jonathan Grave, but this one is specific to Hellfire. Thank you for asking.
That could get very expensive.
Yes.
Well, it can get very expensive, and I have a very lovely publisher who's paying for them. So it's
Wow.
Any other questions? No, at this point, do you have a question, Lisa, you said?
Yes, it's a little off the topic of Hellfire though, but you've adapted works by Nelson DeMille, Thomas Harris, and Norman MacLean into screenplays, right?
Right.
So
Yes.
first, which books of them have you done? And second, what's the most difficult part of moving words from the book into a movie?
Young Men and Fire for Norman MacLean, Red Dragon for Thomas Harris, and Word of Honor for Nelson DeMille. get that. The hardest part is where to cut, because you cannot, a movie is not a book on film. A movie is a story that resonates with the original book. So, which is why people who love a book tend not to like the movie, and why all people are allowed to work on their own movie, because, you know, it'd be a 5-hour movie. So I think that's the hardest part, is deciding which through line do you want to take. With Word of Honor, it's been so long, I forget the details, but I think he had the main character had like 3 or 4 kids. I got rid of 2 of them. Because they didn't really, they added spice to the story, but they didn't advance the story. So
Right.
it's those decisions, and you live in fear when you run face to face with these guys.
So there's a question about Nathan's run. Bonnie indicates she read it again after many years. I've read it. I love it. I heard she heard it's officially being re-released this year. Is that correct?
Yes, it came out in February, I think, in a new edition. And the cool thing on that is what I will call, and I don't know who your audience is, so I have to be careful, but I won't say the real words. So it was the great de-effification of the book. The original version had a lot of bad language because I didn't know any better. It was my first book, and nobody told me it was a bad idea. And I was also talked into an ending that I never liked. It went along the same lines of where I wanted to go, but I just thought it ended abruptly. And so the cool thing about the re-release is it's my original ending as I saw it, and it's okay to read for your grandmother and your kids.
See, so now we're all going to have to read it.
Absolutely, that'd be great.
Okay, Lisa, do you want to move on, and then we'll take more questions at the very end for all the authors, but we should.
Okay, next up is Don Bentley, who spent 10 years flying Apache helicopters in the Army, earning both a Medal for Valor and a Bronze Star. After that, he went to work as an FBI agent, focusing on foreign intelligence, counterintelligence, and SWAT team techniques. His debut novel has just hit the stands. It's called Without Sanction, and in it, Defense Intelligence Agency operative Matt Drake is paralyzed by survivor's guilt over a disastrous mission. He must return to Syria to get a defector out safely in order to keep a weapon of incredible destruction out of the hands of ISIS. Don provided us with his patented recipe for a grilled burger, and his cocktail of choice is Jameson Irish whiskey and ginger ale, which I'm going to sip as he tells us about the book.
Well, thank you for that amazing introduction, and thank you, Rogue Riders, that I get to be here. I'm the newbie. So I'm going to start by holding this book up because I'm contractually obligated to do so, because this model is actually my editor, Tom Colgan. So he makes me put that up every time. So there's Tom Colgan. So when I got to go out and meet people and talk about Without Sanction, as every writer is, I was terrified at the prospect. And so I asked my friend Nick Petrie, who writes, his first book is called The Drifter, and he's written all kinds of things. And I just tend to attribute smart things to Nick, whether he says them or not, because he seems like a smart guy to me. But he said, when you go out, they don't really care about you. What they care about is the origin story of the book. And I thought that's very profound. I don't have a clue what that means. I mean, Captain America has an origin story. I don't know if my book does or not. And so what I'm going to do is tell you a couple of things that kind of influenced me and therefore kind of influenced my book. And so the first one being, I got to fly Apache helicopters for a living for about 10 years, and it's fantastic. It is hard to have a bad day when you're flying Apache helicopters. And I deployed to Afghanistan as part of that. And there was one mission in Afghanistan that went tragically wrong, and I couldn't do anything to stop it. And so that definitely impacted Without Sanction, because the book, I think at its core, is a story about redemption. And so it's a story about Matt Drake, who was a Defense Intelligence Agency case officer. And when the book starts, he's back in his hometown in Austin because of some tragic events that happened in Syria that he believes is his fault, that resulted in the death of his asset and his asset's family, as well as the severe crippling of his best friend. And so what the book really is about is Matt has a chance at redemption if he's brave enough to take it. And when he does take it, he has to go back to the site of where everything went wrong in Syria. And that just really resonated for me. And I know it's probably resonated with a lot of folks who have either military or law enforcement or first responder backgrounds, where there's a moment in time that you wish forever you could get back, even though you know you can't. And so then you spend kind of part of your life trying to figure out, how do I atone for that thing that went wrong? What do I do from now? And so a wise person, Nick Petrie, of course, told me once that in a great book, what's actually happening is the writer is trying to work out a question for themselves in the pages of that novel. And so that was very much something that influenced Without Sanction. The second part of it is I was an FBI agent for a while. And when you're an FBI agent, you get to rub shoulders with a lot of interesting people. And my editor, Tom Colgan, claims he told me this, but it was probably Nick Petrie. But I'll give Tom Colgan the benefit of the doubt here, that when you're a new guy or new girl coming to a genre, you don't, in my genre, you know, Mark Graney does an amazing job writing Mark Graney books. We don't need another Mark Graney. We need something that's the same but different. And so when I was an FBI agent, I was looking and said, you know, what could be the same but different? What could be a book that should be on the shelf, maybe next to Mark Graney if I'm very fortunate, but isn't what Mark Graney writes? And so I had this idea to have my protagonist, Matt Drake, be a Defense Intelligence Agency operative. And I did that because it's an agency that not a whole lot of folks know about, but has a very similar mission to the CIA. And there's an inherent conflict between those two organizations because of that. And I thought that would be an interesting angle to add to the story. And then my job as an FBI agent when I first started was to be our equivalent of a case officer. And that job was to run and recruit what we called sources, or in the intelligence community, what you call assets. And it's very interesting because you're developing a relationship with another human being that you are ultimately going to go ask and do something for you that probably isn't necessarily in their best interest. Because if you're running and recruiting a member of a motorcycle gang and you want information about the drug trade there, when that source or that asset, if it was the intelligence community, goes in and finds that information, if they're found out, it could be very detrimental to them. But at the same time, you've got to ask them to do that for you. And I thought, you know, that would be another great dynamic where there aren't a whole lot of folks who write books from the standpoint of somebody who runs and recruits assets or sources. And so that's where the FBI kind of came in. And then the final part of it, when I got out of the FBI, I was very fortunate to work for a company that marketed and developed a technology for special operations. And it was staffed primarily with folks who were veterans, a number of which were from the Ranger Regiment. And so in the Ranger Regiment, there's something called the Ranger Creed. And to you or an I, it would look like something that maybe human resources put together. Like, here's this great saying that we're all going to say once a day, and it's going to be like, together, everyone achieves more, go team. But when you get to know these people, this creed not only influences their actions when they're in the military, but continues to influence how they live their lives after they leave the military. And there's a part of the Ranger Creed that says, surrender is not a Ranger word. I will never leave a fallen comrade to fall into the hands of the enemy. And under no circumstances will I ever embarrass my country. And I saw that happen in Afghanistan in real time when the operation I was a part of, there was a SEAL team that had gone missing. And until we found those 4 guys, the war in Afghanistan stopped, because that is the commitment that your country makes to you if you go into harm's way. They say, I can't always guarantee that you'll come back alive, but I guarantee that we will expend everything to the last full measure to bring you back. And that's something that's very unique to the US military. You still see folks from Korea or Vietnam or even World War I or II being repatriated when their remains are found, because that's such an important part of serving and is that, you know, that social contract that the US government makes for the men and women who go in harm's way on their behalf. And so that was kind of the final thing that I wanted to put together in this book. So I'm going to start from the beginning because I'm a new guy and that seemed like the place to begin.
Okay.
Aleppo, Syria. The front door split from its frame with an ominous crack as sunlight flooded the room. For Faisal Malouf, time seemed to stand still. The afternoon's golden light played across Yana's features, spilling over her thick eyelashes and the dusting of freckles covering her cheeks. In that moment, there were no civil wars, senseless killing, or black-clad jihadis attempting to force their way into Faisal's tiny apartment. In that moment, only his wife and the squirming bundle clutched to her chest truly existed. And then that moment was gone. Inside, Faisal said, guiding Yana and their daughter into the apartment's safe room with one hand while gripping a pistol with the other. I'll get the beacon. Faisal, Yana said, reaching toward him as her dark eyes filled with tears. Quickly, my love, Faisal said, stepping out of reach of her trembling fingers, just like we practiced. Faisal turned on his heel and raced toward the kitchen in salvation. Snatching the coffee pot from the cluttered counter, he found the recessed button beneath the handle and stabbed downward. The plastic broke beneath his fingers as a hidden switch was depressed. A heartbeat later, the carafe vibrated, signaling that the distress signal had been transmitted. He'd done it. Help was on the way. Dropping the pot, Faisal sighted down the pistol's stubby barrel as the first jihadi burst through the splintered front door, sweeping the room with his AK-47. Faisal jerked the pistol's trigger just as the jihadi's rifle belched fire. An unseen fist hammered Faisal's shoulder. He stumbled, the pistol slipping. Gritting his teeth, Faisal steadied his grip and fired again and again and again. Faisal wasn't a soldier, but he didn't have to be. He triggered the beacon. The American would come, just like he promised. Austin, Texas, 3 months later. The toddler smiled at me from over her mother's shoulder, her eyes sparkling. A pudgy hand snuck past the tumbling curls that framed her face and her tiny fingers waved. I didn't wave back. Not because I didn't know the little girl. I knew her quite well. Her name was Abir, Arabic for beautiful, and the raven-haired cutie more than lived up to her name. No, I was ignoring her for a different reason altogether. Like her mother and father, Abir had been dead for almost 3 months, but that didn't stop me from seeing her. I closed my eyes, fighting the urge to return her wave as I had so many times before in the front room of her family's tiny Syrian apartment. Abir's laugh had been almost as intoxicating as her grin. Even now, it took everything within me not to smile on the off chance that the dead toddler, visible only to me, might break her silence and gift me with a giggle in return. But I didn't smile and I didn't wave because men who interacted with imaginary children attracted attention. Austin, Texas might be the self-professed home of the weird, but I had no desire to make the acquaintance of the TSA men and women who worked at this airport. So I tried to ignore Abir and the shakes started right on schedule.
Oh, that was really amazing. It's an amazing, yeah. And what a background. When you worked in the FBI, were you stationed in DC? Where were you physically located?
No, I was in the Dallas field office.
Oh, okay.
So Don, do you feel that a writer has to have a background in what they're writing when it comes to being realistic with this sort of book?
I would say absolutely not, because the folks that I think of in the top of their genre now, folks like Kyle Mills and Mark Graney and Brad Thor and Vince Flynn when he was still alive and Tom Clancy when he was still alive, none of those folks had backgrounds in the military. Most of them, none of them had even served. I mean, Brad Taylor certainly did, and you can see it in his writing, but I think it's just as much as, what anybody else does is you have to live that and find people who have, and then live vicariously through them. Right. And that's what, I had somebody in an interview once ask me if I was Matt Drake, and I said, absolutely, I'm not Matt Drake, but I've stood in the room with him before. And I think that's what's important is if you don't have that background. And I think some of the times it's better if you don't, because then you got to hunger after it and go figure it out. And it has to feel real for you, and you can't just take it for granted, rather than somebody who has that background maybe can use that as a crutch and not write as well as the person that has to work for it.
Thank you. So does anyone else have any questions or for any of the authors? Yes,
I have a quick question. Hi, hey, this sounds like a fabulous story, and it sounds like I guess a standalone book. I mean, you tell the story, you resolve it at the end, as you say, and all that. So since it's your initial novel, and congratulations,
Thank you.
what is the next book going to be? Will you continue your characters, or will you start all over again with a whole new set of people?
Man, I should have paid you to ask that question. That is perfect. So it is a series, and book number 2 comes out in March, and it's called The Outside Man. And then Tom just bought books 3 and 4 in the series as well. And so those will be coming out in subsequent years. So Matt Drake will be alive for some time.
So Tom, I know I'm going to butcher his name, Tom Abitable. Yeah, he's on the screen there. He says you mentioned the therapeutic aspect of writing to find an answer. Did you find it?
Yeah, I think so. I think one of the things I talk about in when I'm on tour, or when I talk with other people, is for a long time, one of the things that veterans can do is that when you're in the military, or you're in law enforcement, or you're there, and a whole lot of people have experiences similar to yours, you tend to not deal with those because so many people do. It's kind of normal. And then when you leave the service, and you go from this community of people who understand you and have been through what you've been through, to a community of folks who are very well-meaning but have absolutely no idea how to relate to what you're thinking. And so the thing I use to clarify that is my front seater for that mission. So in an Apache, you sit one behind the other, and the pilot command usually sits in the back, and the co-pilot gunner sits in the front. He, after that mission, left aviation, became a Green Beret, did a whole bunch of crazy stuff, and was still dealing with the after effects of that mission. And we both were. And it wasn't until a mutual friend connected us again that we realized we were both trying to work through something. And so I think that's part of what I talk about when I was in my signing back in my hometown. A guy I flew with in Afghanistan showed up, and we spent a long time afterwards talking. And what I say is, I think, yes, to your question, I got some answers writing it. But what I'd say to other veterans or folks who have kind of experiences like that is that your story matters. And your story matters, and you should share it with other people, because just that act of kind of relating this story, of talking about it, provides healing. And you don't know who else is struggling with something from their lives as well.
Jordan Jacobs, who is from New Mexico, says, as a hopeful new girl, she's working on a book right now with Ryan Stack, who's helping her work through the book, asks, what is it like being the new author in the genre or in the room?
It's pretty incredible. And the reason why I say that, I have to do a shout out. I know most of the folks on this call do it too, but if you have never been to Thriller Fest that Kim Howell runs, it is an amazing event. And the reason why it's so amazing is that you can go hang out at the bar and bump shoulders with people like that are on this call right now, people who can, for the price of a beer or a glass of wine, will give you a master's class on what they did wrong or right when their debut came out and what they did. And so, you know, in this, and I think that's true probably in writers in general, but for this genre specifically, you know, it was, I'm an overnight sensation that took 17 years and 3 books that didn't sell to have my first book sell. And what all I felt was extremely welcomed. You know, I was very, and still am very humbled by the folks like Mark Greaney, like Brad Taylor, like, you know, Gail Lynns, who built this genre, and then humbled again by how giving they are of their experiences, what they've gone through. And so being a new author is fantastic if you're smart enough to just drink it all in and ask a lot of questions, I think.
Great.
Oh, 3 books is nothing. I had 9. Yeah. It was my 9th full-length novel that finally got published.
Incredible. That's incredible.
I have 4 on my bookshelf, so
Nice.
it takes a while sometimes. I bet all of you do, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Everyone I'm looking at. Yeah,
Can.
4. Gilstrap 4.
I have 1, but then a bazillion false starts, which probably equal about 4 novels. So yeah, maybe more.
Okay,
Oh,
so
Don, you gotta unmute. We can't hear you.
Build on something that Don said about Thriller Fest in particular, conferences in general, particularly for new writers. Hang out with the crowd you want to belong with. I think one of the problems that happens at these conferences is you have all the new folks, or either the first book people or the ones who are just on the cusp, and they tend to hang back with the other new writers instead while everybody else is over there. People show up at these things to be seen and talked to and share stories. So don't be shy at a conference. And be shy whenever else you're going to be shy. Never be shy at a conference. If you
yes,
have to
true.
and miss the 8 o'clock, whatever the hell the panel is, so that you can stay up till midnight and stay in the bar. You don't have to drink, but that's where 100% of all business in this business is conducted in the bar.
And you can always buy the tapes at these conferences.
Right.
True.
I have a question for Dawn. And I don't know if it's a question or an observation, but I know when I was writing police procedurals, I'm unmuted, okay. When I was writing police procedurals, and because I'd been a police officer for so long, it kind of almost reminds me of what John was talking about when he's going from novel to screenplay. You've got to figure out what to leave out. So I felt that way with the police stuff because, police work, it's like 90% boring. I mean, current stuff aside, right? Present day aside, police work's generally 90% really boring and 10% maybe the shit hits the fan when you depending on which department you work for. But it's the procedure, and procedurally, we would never have a movie or a book or a TV show published if we did it how it really was. So for you, Dawn, in your background with military and public service, did you find it hard to figure out? Because for me, it was like, oh my gosh, can't do that. That's illegal, or that kind of thing. Do you know what I'm saying? Don?
All right, I lost you there for a second.
Yeah, I did. I did too.
There's a big, and Don would know this, at DDoS, massive scale going on right now in the US. It's the stuff born of thriller novels right now, and it's actually going on. So when we're going in and out, it might have something to do with that. I was kind of surprised to see what was going on. But anyways, the question being, Don, do you have an issue with trying to figure out what to leave out and okay, this is not how we really do it in real life, but this is how I'm going to do it for the book?
That's a great question. I think what and you guys, like I said, I'm happy just to be here. I'm Mr. One Book Debut. And so you guys everybody on this call can probably answer that question better than I do. But I think part of it is that if you read enough in your genre, you start to get a feel for, I think, pacing and for what the reader expects in that genre, right? So if you, going back to Tom Clancy, because I'm such a huge fan of his, when I was 13 or 14, a friend down the street lent me a copy of Red Storm Rising, and it would, it just blew me away. And there were times where like Harold Coyle from Team Yankee and Larry Bond with Red Phoenix were writing these sprawling military epic things. And you understood when you read that, here's what the reader's going to expect. They want to be in the turret of that M1 tank, or they want to be along for the ride in an Apache gun run. And so I did, one of the benefits, I say, looking back, I'm very grateful, my first 3 books didn't sell because it forced me to read more and more and more and understand, kind of going back to that same but different, what does the reader expect when they pull out a book in this genre? And then what story can I tell that fits in there? And so part of me, all writers like to talk about writing process, but part of what's helped me bring discipline to it is I'm pretty wide open on my first draft and put a lot of stuff in there that I end up cutting out later. And then I love the book, Save the Cat, and taking those beats and putting back right on you, because then that starts to bring structure in, and you're like, okay, I've got to cut this out, or this entire subplot doesn't go, or the book will move faster. And so that, I think, is part of the answer, Robin. I think the other part is I have, like I said, I've been fortunate enough to have a lot of friends in the special operations community, and I'll give them, like in without sanction, there's a big hey-ho scene where it's a hey-ho jump. But one of my friends was a jump master and did quite a few hey-ho jumps. And I had him read it, and he's like, we'd never send this guy by himself. I'm like, yeah, I know. But what about this part? And he's like, it's a pretty good story. I'm like, all right, if this guy says it's good, or I have these folks who are doing it that say, yeah, I'm going to suspend my disbelief, but man, you really got my attention, then I feel like I've got something. So I guess that's how I've managed to navigate it so far in my long, stellar career of novels, Robin.
Before we lose the Red Storm Rising moment, when it came out, I was in that business. I was in a company, we manufactured the Stinger and MLRS and Navy Standard Missile, and we were second on the shuttle program back then, but which was not a military program. But we did all of these military programs during the Reagan years, and everybody was so siloed. We knew the propulsion system and what it did. We didn't know how it fit into the war plan. So when I read Red Storm Rising, and you have Beagle up on Reykjavik and all this stuff, that's the first time any of us knew how any of this stuff actually fit into the larger plan. It was so cool.
Yeah, and I got to give a shout out again to Mark Graney, because what he and Rip Rawlings did with Red Metal, they revitalized that genre again. They all of a sudden, it's another sprawling military epic, and you can see kind of the expertise that Rip brings, operational expertise of here's a plausible way where a third world war would unfold. And then, Mark's such a good writer tying that all together. And anyway, absolutely.
So I have a question for all of you. Do all of you write massive first drafts and cut them? Or do some of you plot a little tighter to the bone and write it tighter from the get-go?
Well, I personally, I hate to cut because I can't stand wasted effort. So I try to I only cut things if my agent makes me cut them.
Well, I'm an engineer by background, so everything is an engineered product. So I start each writing session by rewriting what I wrote the previous writing session. So it's sort of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. So by the time I actually get to the end of the first draft, I'm probably on my 4th draft. So when I type the end for the first time, I'm just one quick pass through it, because I've already cut the stuff that needs to be cut, and I've already modified the problems with the plot as I go along. So when I get to the end, I'm pretty much done.
That's
So
how
I saw Robin laughing, and I feel like she should answer that.
I vary. Depends on how good of a story idea I have. If I've got a fully formed plot in my head, I will write from A to Z, each chapter successively. But generally, I'm what's called a pantser, I guess. And I think it infuriates editors and everybody, because it says, so can you send us a synopsis of what the book's about so we can get the covers out there? And it's like, yeah, as soon as I think of one. I tend to have I could do a couple paragraphs of what I think the book's about. I have kind of a beginning and I kind of know the end, sort of. And it's all the in-between stuff that I have issues with. So what I started doing is, because if I have to write a synopsis, they will never get the book, never. And so I will start writing, and I will kind of create the synopsis as I go. And then when I get stuck, I will go back to the synopsis and kind of start from what I have and revamp that and kind of see where I'm going off track, and then go back to the book. And so there will be a lot of, I'll write something like Sam and Remy walked into the room and put description here. And, so a lot of holes and whatnot. And hopefully I will think of something really cool that's going to go whatever that description is that will be plot worthy. So
that's amazing. I would be stuck. Put description here. I would be thinking about the description for the next week and a half if I could.
Well, that's just it. I would stop I would stop at the description and then it'd be like, oh my God, I'm not getting anything done. So I finally realized just start writing, because really, 90% of the battle is sitting in front of the computer and typing. So that's how I do it.
Chris, to answer your question, my books tend to get bigger with each edit, which seems to be a contradiction in terms. But as an example, I'm writing the fourth in my Lassiter Martinez case file series, which is 2 female detectives here in Bernalillo County in New Mexico. And when I finished the first draft, I was at 72,000 words. But then when I go back and do the editing, my books tend to be, in the first draft, plot driven. But then I start fleshing out the characters and fleshing out their relationships with one another and building the dialogue. And so I'm now in the third edit and I'm at 80,000 words. So it's, and it's probably going to end somewhere around 82 or 83,000 words. But my editing process is more of a fleshing out than it is a cutting.
Well, and Tom Abitable says, I tell the members of my mastermind group, my experts, that I won't let their facts get in the way of my story. And we have one more question, and then I think we're probably going to have to wrap this.
Yeah, I think so.
Chris Howdy, who is going to be our guest next month, he's going to be our thriller debut author, wants to know from Don, do you ever imagine pulling those 3 novels out of the drawer for rewrite and resubmission, or do you only cannibalize them for parts? And I'd like to know what the rest of you do with those novels on your shelf.
See, Chris is, if y'all have not read Deep State, it is fantastic. And one of the reasons why Chris's novel is fantastic is he was a professional screenplay writer before he became a novelist. And so he scoffs at the idea that I would write something and throw it in the desk and never get it out again. And I think to answer that, I don't. And because to me, the painful reason that they didn't sell is because they weren't good enough to sell yet. And so I think, it takes however many hours, 10,000 hours to get good at something, right? Like how many words does it take to write something that's good enough that somebody's going to buy it from you? And so that's my first answer, is I feel like those were me learning more about my craft. And then my second answer is I feel like each one of those books brought me closer to my protagonist, Matt Drake. The third book I wrote was part of my MFA program. And it was the first time I got brave enough to try and write a first person POV, which is what Matt is. And so I don't look at them as wasted time, but I think I'd be fooling myself if I could resurrect them.
I've actually tried to resurrect all those partials and even the one whole one. And it's just like, oh my gosh, there's just so much wrong with it. It's not worth it for me. So
yeah, that's it. I mean, I hate rewriting. I know a lot of authors like really love it. I hate it. So I would rather just start over.
Well, my books in the drawer, I never tried to sell them because I knew they weren't very good. They just didn't have a story to sustain itself. So I guess technically the first one I tried to sell, I did. That was Nathan's Run, but it was my 4th book. Everything, and I cannibalize. And I make it a point, I'm kind of a traditionalist on things. There are chunks, a scene or a character or something from each of those 3 books that I have put into published books, just so that it wasn't a complete one. But right now, those books, what was ever left of them, they're just bleached bones. There's nothing usable that's left in there at all.
How about you, Joe?
Well, it's interesting. The first book I wrote got published. So I got.
Well, we officially hate you.
Yeah, we're not going to talk to you anymore.
He's one of those.
just mute him.
Am I the only one who wanted to flip off the screen right there?
But I did write a book, which was about the 10th book I wrote, and I couldn't get it published. It's about human trafficking, and although that has been an element in some of my books, and it's not like it doesn't happen every day, but it was so frightening that I haven't been able to get my publisher to publish it. So I do have this sitting in the drawer, and I just had a daughter-in-law go to India to research, to help a group do a movie on trafficking in India, and came back, and it made my book seem like a fairy tale compared to what she had seen. And so one of these days, I guess people will be willing to read it. So we'll see.
Well, I think we need to thank you all for coming.
Yeah.
And Lisa
Yeah,
for MC.
Thank you. Yes, thank all of you. Thank you so much for coming and reading for us and answering all our questions. And thank you, participants, for joining us here today. Don't forget to order books. And next month's Rogue Reads will be July 13th.
Thank you.
And who's coming?
Thank you.
We have Ace Atkins,
Yes,
Howdy,
John Land
mhm,
and Karen Robards.
mhm.
Wow.
Wow,
Wow.
So
great
Yeah.
group.
should
That'd
be
be great.
great. And do check out the Facebook page. There are comments that people have been writing, and there were quite a few people that was good to see jump on to watch. I
Good.
recognized a lot of names. So,
Thank you, ladies.
For having us.
Hey, good night.
all right. Good night.
Good night.
Right.